This video has been sponsored by EcoFlow. Exactly how fragile are the cells in a solar panel? Can they still function when they fracture or even break? I've installed solar in my house, and I'm always eager to learn more about this technology, like what happens when solar cells break, and why you should avoid walking on the glass or putting other stress on the frames. I also want to know if they can be powered by artificial light, and what is the best angle for solar panels to get the highest efficiency. First, to show what happens to solar panels when they break, I first need to make one, so then I can break it. And what better way to make a solar panel than making it purely powered by the sun? EcoFlow sent me this battery generator and portable solar panel, and with the battery 100% charged, the solar panel is bringing in about 70 watts, and my soldering station is using less than that, and I'm ready for my first off-grid soldering experience. While I'm soldering 4 solar cells together, let's take a moment to understand a little bit about how they work. The main technology in a solar panel is what's called the PN junction. I think this is one of the most underappreciated inventions of all time. Almost all modern technology is built off of this. And the main ingredient is basically purified sand. Yes, sand like at the desert or at the beach. You take silicon and infuse it with elements like boron on one side and phosphorus on the other, and this creates the PN junction. And when this system is exposed to an outside source like sunlight, it causes the electrons to move around. Here's a solar cell, and on the outside of this sandwich are wires on the front to capture these moving electrons. That's what these white lines are for. And on the back, it's one solid piece of metal because light only needs to come through the top. Here's a zoomed in view of a solar cell with a lot of fractures in it. Most of these you can't see without magnification. One of the big issues with these fractures is that they can inhibit electrons from efficiently reaching the collector wires, and the cell's producing ability is diminished. These microfractures can be caused by things like pressure on the panel, a manufacturing issue, or from the expanding and contracting of the frame. Amazingly though, the solar panel will still produce power, but the damage is done, and these fractures won't heal themselves. Back outside, I'm soldering these cells in series, connecting the positively charged backside to the negatively charged front side of the cell next to it, just like you would put batteries in your devices. With the cells wired together and under sunlight, I'm getting about 2 volts, which is what I expect because each cell produces half a volt. And if I switch the mode on my meter to measure current, I get a short circuit current of around 1.3 amps. Now, using an online tool with these 2 values, my little solar panel is estimated to make about 2 watts with this current amount of sunlight, which is more than enough to drive this motor. We know that a fracture could degrade the performance, but what happens when I break whole sections off? After the damage, it's still able to drive the motor. Now let's wire these broken pieces together and see what happens. While I'm doing that, let me tell you about this guy. EcoFlow sent me the River Pro, and like the next day we had a very rare power outage, and this battery backup was very helpful. In the morning, I was able to make coffee for my wife and I. It also allowed us to make breakfast on the griddle for our family of 7. I was a little concerned with the 600 watt total output that it might not work, but it got the griddle up to the right temperature and I was impressed. I've mostly been charging it with solar, but from a wall outlet it can charge from 0 to 80% in an hour, and I'm eager to try taking it camping to see how it does. It's portable at around 16 pounds and has a 720 watt hour battery. EcoFlow will have massive discounts on the upcoming Prime Day on the River Pro solar panels and other bigger units. Check the video description down below to find out what's going on sale. Now that I have these 4 other broken pieces soldered together, I can hook it up to the motor. The amount of sunlight was similar to before, but the motor needs some help to get started, and it's able to send a little under 1/10 of an amp. So what happens to solar panels when they break? 2 things I want to point out. One is that they still work. When I snapped off each piece, it was still producing enough power to run the motor, and even a small piece would still be able to produce some power if it was wired up. The second thing to point out is that when solar cells are wired in series, the power producing ability of that string is limited to the weakest cell. When I completely shade one cell, the amps almost go to 0, even though 3 out of the 4 are in the sun and it's pretty sunny out. And with my 2 sets of broken strings, the power of each is limited by the smallest section. The sunlight is fairly constant now, and you can see on this string, when I measure the short circuit current of the whole thing, you can see I get around 1 amp. But if I measure a bigger piece by itself, I get 1.9 amps. Now measuring the smallest piece again, I get the same as the whole string. So this cell is the bottleneck for the circuit. Now my next question is, can solar panels be powered by artificial light? Like, could I recreate the sun and see what happens? I bought 40,000 lumens worth of lights to find out. So I set it up so that the River Pro would run the LEDs, and I wanted to see what effect the light would have. Could they charge the battery back up? So I needed something bright and low wattage. These are daylight in color, 90 watts each, and I was sold when the top Amazon review was titled Surface of the Sun Brightness. At first, when I powered on all four plus an extra light, I was disappointed because though I turned my yard from darkness to daylight, on the solar input, 0 watts were being produced. On my Irradiance meter, you get about sun level brightness, which is about 1,000 watts per meter squared, but only when you're right next to the light, and the intensity drops significantly when you pull back a few inches or centimeters away. So next I held the lights really close, and when I did this, it started to generate solar power, and the highest I was able to make was 4 watts. Not quite a perpetual energy machine. I'm outputting about 370 watts for the lights and bringing back 4 watts of solar power. To my eyes, it seems like there's so much light here, but reality is that the sun puts out so many different wavelengths, and even on very cloudy days, there's a lot more light intensity. But one side benefit of this experiment is now I basically have portable stadium level lights, and I'm ready for a late night soccer game, frisbee, baseball, or even project. Because I had these lights on, I even found this going on in my yard. I won't say any more. Another question I have with solar is, what's the best angle for greatest efficiency? So if you have a portable solar panel like this, then it's not too hard to get good production. You aim it at the sun and you're doing well. But if you want the most power, you want to fine-tune that direction and angle of the panel. This is an irradiance meter. It measures the amount of light in watts per meter squared. To give you a reference point, at the factory, solar panels are rated using a standard of 1,000 watts per meter squared. And if you're wondering, on one day I measured up to 1,400 watts per meter squared. So the sun can produce more than the test conditions at the factory. Now you certainly want your panels pointing at the sun because there's a big difference once I get into the shade. Notice the meter reading drops by almost 1,000. But what's incredible about the energy from the sun is that even if you were to flip over your panel and point it at the ground, on a sunny day you would still be able to make power. But ideally, you want the sunlight to hit your panel at a 90-degree angle. As I tilt the meter, you can see the intensity shift as I vary the angle. And the highest seems to be where I already have the panel positioned, which is at about a 23-degree angle. Of course, the direction matters as well. If I were to keep a similar angle but point the panels in a different direction, the intensity and power production would go down. And since the sun keeps moving, if you want the most power, you need to adjust your panels. For example, I came back outside after about 2 hours, and I can see that if I shift the panels slightly to the right, I would produce more power. And this is something I might not have noticed just by looking at the sunlight on the panels. So you can move portable panels, but what angle and direction should you choose for a fixed location? Well, for direction, you ideally want to point your panels towards the equator. This will give you the maximum sun hours. For angle or tilt of the panels, you want to choose the best average for your location. I have a resource listed in the description you can check out, and there's a formula on there. And if I do this calculation for my house, I would take my latitude, which is about 40 degrees, multiply it by 0.76, and then add in 3.1 degrees, which means for a year-round ideal, I should put my panels at a 34-degree angle. I couldn't do that on my roof, but what's interesting is that since my roof is about 18.5 degrees, it's actually pretty great for summer sun. If I do the same calculation from before, I get an ideal angle of 13 degrees for the summer sun, so pretty close. If you like this video, please click the like button and leave a comment or question. I'd love to hear from you.